All right, well, good morning, everybody. We are glad that you're here for this Rector's Forum. We are blessed today to be joined by Dr. Ed Miller, a professor and retired Unitarian Universalist minister, who is going to talk with us today about aging and spirituality. So, Ed, I wanted to start just with a general question about some of the challenges, spiritual challenges that come with aging. We know, of course, that as we age, things happen to our physical well-being challenges. We may sometimes face financial challenges. But what are some of the spiritual or religious challenges that people face as they age?
But in response to Justin's comment, I would say, do you all have access to an outline?
Yeah. Yep.
And share this? That outline is bigger than the time we have together by a lot. It is an outline for one of the 6 sessions that I led on this topic in conjunction with the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. Have any of you had any experience with what is called OLLI?
A little.
And so I don't expect to cover all of those points, but it did serve as a kind of a roadmap for me to follow as we go along. I would say, in response to your opening question, Justin, that those challenges that I mentioned in the very first part of that outline are indeed physical challenges, mental challenges, the decline in cognitive functioning, and in some cases taking a fairly dramatic form with dementia, or the form of dementia that we know as Alzheimer's. But there's also emotional issues, and I think that is perhaps where spiritual wisdom can have the greatest impact on our lives, because aging is a time of loss, not only loss of functions, but loss of significant individuals. It's a time that we endure various forms of suffering, and I'm going to do a little detour into Buddhism to talk about their understanding of suffering and what it means. And then there are social issues, what the adult development theorists call disengagement, which is epitomized in the experience of retirement. And disengagement is the process of mutual withdrawal between the individual and the support systems that they have known for a long time. And for people who have been very firmly attached to their careers and their colleagues, retirement represents a significant turning point, and also oftentimes a significant challenge as they move into the next stage of their life. I think of also the loss of a partner. Obviously is for most of us the most important experience we have, not limited of course only to later adulthood, but along the way in the form of divorce and separation and so on. So the way I view aging and spirituality, if I can try to put it in a nutshell, is that aging is itself a form of spiritual practice. It encourages us, and in some cases forces us, to grow in ways spiritually that are new to us. At the end of the reverse side of that outline, you'll see a list of books, and I want to refer specifically to one that bears that title, Aging as a Spiritual Practice by Louis Richmond. And if there was one single book in that set of books there that I would recommend, that I would commend to your reading, I think it would be that one, because it not only discusses what those challenges are, but ways that we can respond to those challenges in a way that enhances our growth rather than inhibiting it. Now, as Justin mentioned, I come from a Unitarian Universalist tradition. I was raised in the United Church of Christ, and along the way in college, and later on in grad school, became more and more interested in Unitarian Universalism. And one thing that I found there that was appealing to me was that not Unitarian Universalism alone, but certainly among other traditions, UUs have an appreciation of the diversity of sources of spiritual wisdom, certainly from within the Judeo-Christian heritage, but also from other traditions as well. And I'll probably spend a fair amount of time this morning, if I can get myself to stop introducing the topic. I'll probably give you some samples of how those other traditions view aging as a spiritual experience.
So Ed, just to summarize what you said, it sounds like some of the main challenges that spiritual wisdom can speak to are loss, loss of a loved one, family members, friends. I certainly hear from people all the time who are aging that the loss of friends makes them feel alone and sometimes fearful. You also touched on retirement, and I think this is maybe an underappreciated area of spiritual challenge that we might want to flesh out a little bit. Particularly in a subculture like our own, people invest a lot of significance in their job as part of their identity. If you think about it, in some ways you spend more time on your job than on anything else during a core period of your life. And so if that's your identity, and then one day you retire, and maybe in your mind you imagine that everyone's going to remember you, and all of your accomplishments are going to be highly regarded for centuries on, you discover, like within 2 weeks, you've been replaced and forgotten. So I think that raises some, at least for me as I think about it as a pastor, some really significant spiritual challenges. I'm wondering, have you seen that in your ministry, and what sort of emotional, spiritual issues have come up with that for you?
Well, I think you touched on perhaps the single most important one, and that is the loss of the sense of identity. And for people who have been very invested in their careers, particularly if they have been in a particular type of work or profession for a long period of time, that the loss of that source of self-worth can be a significant blow to their sense of who they are and where they belong. And I will say that this is one of the important things, that being part of a religious community is really important, because it helps to soften, mitigate that sense of isolation that can be very dramatic and sudden. There's the retirement party, you're maybe handed a watch, and people clap, and then the next morning you wake up and you find that you were alone and somehow lost. And you're responsible for structuring your own time. And if you've been working hard for most of your adult life, that in itself can be challenging. And that's why I think it's important, not only in retirement, but before retirement, to be a part of a support network. And I think churches, spiritual communities, are perhaps the most significant form of support that a lot of people can rely on.
Does this experience, though, also raise questions about whether we are investing too much of our identity in things like our job?
Short answer is yes.
That was a cool question.
Next question. I think in our culture that places so much emphasis on achievement and productivity that the experience of losing that source of self-valuing, self-worth, can really be a blow unless you have other commitments that can either replace or augment your sense of identity. And that's why being committed to volunteer work in the community beforehand, and I hope I have a chance and time to talk about some of the ways that you can prepare for these transitions ahead of time. Because if you wait until these events happen, you can really be at a loss. But having a group of people who know you and have supported you and think you're worth something beyond what you do for your job, that can mean a lot. So just a community in and of itself is valuable in that transition.
So certainly in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the ways that the church speaks to this is through the fact that our identity is that we are brothers and sisters with Christ, we're children of God, we're made in the image of God, as Genesis says. That's our true identity in a way. But I'm wondering, and maybe this is a good place to bring in, say, Buddhism, but how do other traditions think about identity and respond to this issue of kind of loss of worldly identity?
Well, I would say that one of the main differences between the Western traditions, Judaism, Christianity in particular, in comparison to what we call broadly Eastern or non-Western traditions, is the issue of attachment. Attachment to outcomes, and feeling like, again, I don't want to say this word too many times, like our value as a human being, as a child of God, that our value is defined by our accomplishments, or is defined by the material signs of our accomplishment. And one of the valuable lessons from Buddhism that I have derived is that if you become overly attached to anything, it can be a source of suffering. And the word, the Sanskrit word for suffering, which I think I have written on the outline, you see, is called dukkha. And dukkha means suffering, yes, in a physical sense, but it means more than that. It means spiritual and emotional suffering. And to some degree, our suffering, for those of us who have been narrowly committed to a job, to material success, and the signs of it, some of the cause of the source of suffering is self-inflicted and self-administered. Because and this is where I think the idea of being able to back away from, to disengage from attachments, particularly the ones that revolve around ourself as a separate ego, as different and separate from others, as different and separate from God. That is a really important spiritual goal in later adulthood, is to not align your sense not only of self-worth, but of your value in the universe, in your individual accomplishments. Another important aspect of Christianity and of Buddhism held in common is that we can relieve our suffering by serving others. And in a sense, our own suffering, our experiences of loss, disappointment, failure, heighten our sensitivity to those experiences in other people. And it is through that empathy with the suffering of others that in some ways is the prototype of Christianity. Because the central figure of the Christian faith is one who suffered on behalf of other people through sacrificial love. And if we form those kinds of relationships and commitments earlier in life, then I think it prepares us much better for being able to do that and be sensitive to others as we go more through the later stages of adulthood.
So it sounds like the spiritual wisdom here, Ed, is that, if I can put it this way, we want to hold the things of this world lightly. right? We don't want to invest ultimate significance in anything that is of this world, because by definition, it will pass away, right?
It will pass away.
And this is, of course, I think the great lesson that the Buddha discovered when he went out and saw suffering in various forms. That when we attach ultimate meaning, ultimate significance to something in this world, we are setting ourselves up for suffering.
Yeah.
And yet, this is, of course, the very thing we're encouraged to do in our culture, isn't it? To find our meaning in the things of this world. But the spiritual wisdom you're suggesting is that if we find our meaning in love, which is a kind of self-giving, that can never be taken away from us. That's a firm foundation. And that ultimately feels like a life well lived when we look back.
It is. And that capacity for loving others and empathizing with the suffering of others has no limits. Unlike the limitations of material success and the science of material success, the love that we see in the life of Jesus is boundless. And I think that's why that life and that sacrifice is such an ultimate example of the loss of self for the sake of others. So it isn't so much that you lose your sense of who you are, but you invest your love and your concern in the well-being of others. And there's no limit to where that can lead you in terms of serving others. So one practical suggestion, if you're not already doing so, is to become involved in some form of community service. It may be service within this religious community, or it may be something within the community at large. I personally have a commitment that I've honored from time to time to intergenerational service, through involvement with the Boys and Girls Club, through involvement with a youth organization several years ago, and to be in leadership positions within those organizations. And that provided some of the most rewarding experiences, but as I grew older and the generational gap between me individually and these young people, as that grew wider, it frankly was humbling and painful. And it all came to a head when I went on a spring break tour with some kids from the Waynesboro and Stanton Boys and Girls Club. And the whole idea, I have a background in college work as a professor and administrator. And so I was really eager to get these kids, some of whom neither they nor their parents had any direct experience with colleges. And so the purpose of this tour was to say, this is what colleges look like, okay? And to allow them to not only see what different schools look like and feel like when you walk around and see what the students there, how they interact with each other, but also to begin to aspire to them. So we did a tour during that spring break week of several colleges and universities in Virginia. And on our last day out, oh, I chuckle to remember this. There was no chuckling matter at the time. The last day out, I stood up in front of this little bus full of 12 and 13-year-old kids. And I tried to lead them in a rendition of This Little Light of Mine. Call and response. And it went nowhere. Those kids just sat there and looked at me like, you pathetic old man. So it reminded me that generational gaps are not easy to bridge, but to look for sources of common interest and common importance is one way of bridging the generational divide.
Your comment about generations makes me think about another challenge that I've seen with aging, which is the challenge of letting go. So sometimes the losses are imposed on us, so to speak, by just the circumstances of life. But sometimes it seems one of the challenges to aging is letting go of the authority, the influence, the identity, again, that you might have had at a previous period of your life. I imagine that as a retired person, you've probably had to deal with that to some degree. Why is that challenging for us in your sense? Why do people struggle to let go?
Well, I think that that touches on some of what we've already been discussing, about how your sense of self-worth is too often too closely identified with how you can influence other people. I will share another personal experience, if I might. When I made the transition from being a dean at a college, where I had a certain amount of influence and authority, I was kind of like the last stop on the academic problems pathway. Students who were at risk of being suspended, or who were failing classes, or who needed to withdraw from a class toward the end of a semester because of some foreseen circumstances. The last stop for many of them was in my office talking with me. And I felt that was one of the things that actually led me to ministry, because I found that the ability to help people under those difficult circumstances was really quite rewarding. I wasn't always successful at it, and there were students who probably gained the system in that way. But the important thing is that I had in that system at Mary Washington, it was then Mary Washington College, if I can wrap myself out here, that experience at Mary Washington College really paved the way for a transition into ministry, that aspect of the position, being helpful to others, which I found increasing was the most valued and satisfying part of that work. But I lacked, I hasten to add, Justin, I know maybe you'll identify with this too, when I moved into a position of being minister of a congregation, that authority went right out the window. Most of it.
Right.
I was influential, but not powerful.
You know, and there's a profound lesson, I think, in what you said there too, though, is that you had skills that you developed, right? And really a sense of calling. And you knew, it sounds like, when to let go of a particular role, and then to take those skills and apply them in a new context, right? And that's part of what I hear you saying too, is letting go doesn't mean giving up your skills, your talents, your calling, but finding what is the right place to use those things at this moment in my life.
Yeah,
And not trying to kind of hold on to the past.
Yeah, I think you put it well. There's not a whole lot I can add to what you just said. So thank you for that, because the immediate urge for some people is to say, oh, to heck with it. I'm now going to engage in a life of self-indulgence and leisurely activities, and it's all for me.
You mean we shouldn't hang out on the beach all day?
Not all day.
Not all day.
Not every day.
Not every day.
But to be able to take those talents, as you say, and apply them to a different setting, particularly a setting that is more oriented toward meeting the needs of other people. And I think that's where, as challenging as intergenerational work can be, that is the context where I think we can be of most value as mentors and supporters of people from younger generations.
So let's tie this together, and you had talked about some ways that we can prepare for this moment so it doesn't catch us unaware. Let's say you're, in your 30s or 40s and you're kind of in the prime of your working life, so to speak, but you know that this is coming, right? Because it comes to us all. How should you prepare yourself? What are some things that you can do so that when the moment comes that you find you are in the last season of your earthly life, you're ready, and you're not caught in these spiritual challenges?
Well, I think I've touched on a couple of those already. That is to to have already made earlier in your adult life, to have made commitments and honored commitments that involve service to others. So that would be.
So start early.
Yeah. Don't wait until you're kind of left out on this limb of retirement, or of some catastrophic incident. You know, using retirement as sort of the prime example that nearly everybody goes through, that presents them with that challenge. But there are others along the way where you lose your job, you lose a partner or spouse, and if you have not had practice with committing your energy in service of other people, that you can really be at a loss. And you made mistakes. It's one thing that I think we should all recognize is that as soon as people learn that you are retired, they will be after you to encourage you to join them in their commitments. And that's wonderful. But it's also important that you be able to clarify, okay, these kinds of commitments are more important than these other ones. And secondly, how well, as you touched on, how well do these commitments and these organizations match up with what I have to offer? I have a fairly long history of leadership, for better and for worse, and so I tend to think of connecting with an organization eventually with the goal of becoming a leader in some fashion or another. But that's not true for everybody. Not everybody wants to be that. Despite my small stature, when I was young in my neighborhood, there were two Eds who lived across the street from each other. And I was the older one, and the other one was younger. So I was Big Ed, and he was Little Ed. And I spent the rest of my life trying to justify that title, in spite of my small stature. And what I learned is that you can be big in some ways, but you can't be big in all ways. And so you have to, as I recounted that experience with the kids in the bus looking back at me like I was an alien, you have to be able to accept the fact that you can't do all things well, that there will be some trial and error as you try out new things. There will be some organizations that may be attractive on the surface, but that you learn are, in some cases, so fraught with conflict. Are any of you on boards of directors? Okay, I see a few knowing nods and smiles. That you find out that sometimes there are issues within the leadership of the organization itself, the board of directors, that really undermine the success of that organization.
I think it's a good time to open it up for questions. So what questions do you have for Ed? Yes?
I was wondering if you had any thoughts or comments on something that I've recently started to experience, which is my physical age not matching up with the mental self-concept that I have. And I've talked to my parents about it, and they have the same kind of, like I don't see myself as in my late 30s. My mental self-concept is like 10 years younger until I talk to someone 10 years younger, and I can't understand what they're saying, which makes me feel 10 years older than I am. So how do you incorporate like spiritual practices in that when time is slowly marching on, but mentally you're kind of, not in an immature way, just like you know what I mean?
I sure do. I think it's unfortunate that our society holds out as kind of the ideal model, a young adult who is physically able and agile and mentally quick and all those things that some of us, as you have articulated, we see declining, sometimes slowly, sometimes because of some life event, it declines or disappears very quickly. And I guess my thought is, first of all, to give up that ideal that the best way to be an adult is to act like you're still in your 30s. Let go of that. And the second thing is, what of the experiences that I have had subsequent to that period of life have really enabled me to adopt a different, more mature outlook. And trying to duplicate the physical well-being of a younger adult, which is such a huge industry in our culture, is ultimately futile. And I frankly get annoyed with some of the ads that show an 80-year-old finishing the Boston Marathon, and isn't that wonderful? And my thought is, should we really hold that up as our ideal? But instead to recognize our physical limits. And I guess the simplest way to do that, to acknowledge and harness our more limited physical attributes and strengths, is to slow down. And that's one of the reasons why I think the practice of meditation, which cuts across all of these religious traditions, Christianity, Buddhism, every single major spiritual tradition in history has some form of meditation practice at its core. And the practice itself is fairly similar. I think that the presenter, Kevin Hart, who was here last month, spoke about that. He concentrated, as I recall, I was here taking notes, but as I recall, he focused mainly on contemplating a particular passage of Scripture. And that, to me, is an intellectual exercise, but I would also add, not disagree with that, but add as an option that you practice contemplation in silence. And some of the most rewarding forms of meditation that I have are actually when I'm very active. I'm still, at my age of 78, I still love to ride a bicycle. And I've made the compromise of getting an e-bike, which has extended that career. But some of my, I don't have profound thoughts, but I have great appreciation for my surroundings when I'm riding my bicycle. I ran the Boston Marathon when I was in my 40s, and I had this route, this 20-mile route that I would run once a week in preparation for that experience. And after I ran the Boston Marathon, I got on a bike and rode that route. And I noticed things along the way and appreciated sights and sounds and smells that I had never appreciated when I was running, intensively. So that's part of the letting go, I think, is to be able to appreciate your surroundings, whether it is through just passively sitting, focusing on breathing, which seems to be kind of the core experience of meditation, or doing something that is repetitive. And I would commend to you the book by Thich Nhat Hanh about mindfulness, and it's listed in the sources at the back of the outline, The Miracle of Mindfulness. And he's written several others, but he talks a lot about focusing on your breath and also concentrating, devoting your entire attention to what you are doing and what is in front of you, and not being distracted by your own thoughts. And that is not always easy, particularly if you're dealing with, an important decision or some new challenge in life, to let go of that. But one of the ways of doing it, for me, is to be out in nature, in my case, to be moving, physically, exerting myself. But for other people, like Thich Nhat Hanh, he said, just walking and concentrating on one step in front of the others is itself a form of focused meditation.
So I hear you saying, Ed, that at each stage of our life, too, we should be authentic to who we are, right? So don't try to be a 25-year-old when you're 65. And I think one of the pieces of wisdom in that, too, is that, and you've talked a lot about community and the importance of community, is how we really all need intergenerational community. We need to be our authentic selves, whatever age we are, whatever generation, but we need to be with each other and in relationship. I have come to really appreciate in ministry that that's one of the gifts of the church, of a religious institution, is it's one of the very few places in society that brings together people of different generations and ages to learn from each other, to be in relationship. I don't know that we fully appreciate that in our culture, but I think that's something critical to being fully alive too.
I completely agree, and I think church is one of the very best opportunities for crossing those generational boundaries, which, as I said earlier, are not always easy to cross without seeming to be artificial.
We make sure everybody here knows this little light of mine. Whatever their age.
Don't ask me to lead.
All right, yes, Richard.
Yeah, one of the things that you hear about in our culture is this idea of a bucket list. These are the things I'm going to do before I die. And, you know, some of them can be very helpful and uplifting. I'm going to make up or reconnect with this relative from whom I'm estranged. And other things can be, they're fun or they're entertaining. But if you let those go and instead experience where you are, I think you're better off. But a bucket list is not a helpful thing, even though some people sort of hold one internally, consciously or not.
Well, I think that's really a good point, especially if you are attached to the bucket list and consider it a kind of checklist. Okay, got that one done. And I think to be open to experiences that are not on the bucket list, that come out of nowhere, to be flexible enough to go toward them and experience them fully is a real gift, and not be tied to the bucket list. Again, I think that in a sense reflects our very strong achievement orientation in our culture. That you got to do these things or else you're not succeeding. And so I would say hold the bucket list lightly. Hold only a few items on the bucket list to allow for other things to enter that you don't expect. What else? I'm just going to toss in a story because it meant a lot to me, but it's sort of extraneous to your particular question, and that is, yesterday, my wife Renee, who is here with me, and I attended a memorial service for a member of our congregation in Waynesboro. And as often happens, members of the family stood up and offered their reflections on the life and the valuable experience that they had with the person who had just died. And had a slideshow, which was really quite enlightening about who that person had been before many of us got to know him. Where am I going with this? But I think it occurred to me that I appreciated all the more an opportunity that I had with my family, with my dad, who was diagnosed with prostate cancer when he was in his early 80s. And as he approached his 90th birthday, he was told that the cancer had spread. And so my sister and I, knowing that, scheduled a grand celebration in his church, in the social hall of his church that he and my mom had been members of for over 50 years. And he sat in the front of the room, kind of like this, and people stood up and offered testimonials about the impact that he had had on them. And he took it all in. And I thought, it was what I would call a living memorial service, right? Because he was aware enough that he could appreciate these things and feel reassured that his life really had been of meaning and value, not only to him, but to many other people. And within a month, he was gone. And I thought that what we did, sort of haphazardly, what my sister and I decided to do, just really represented kind of a capstone experience for him. So, my recommendation to you is if you either are or have a loved one who perhaps has been diagnosed with some kind of terminal condition, or who is clearly showing the signs of dementia, that you go ahead and do something like that they can sit and listen to what their life has meant to other people.
Following up on the question of meaning and the admonition to let go of things, what are ways that the other spiritual traditions have looked at the sense of self? Because you can't give up that void. How do you talk to yourself? Like, I am a child of God, or what do the other traditions say I am? And fill in the blank.
Well, I will say, first of all, that they probably, in general, this is a huge generalization that I'm offering here, but perhaps other traditions, non-Western traditions at least, place less emphasis on the I part of that statement, and more emphasis on who I was for other people. And those two things are not antithetical. The I am and I have been for others can certainly have a huge amount of overlap. And the sense, like I said, I will just put a footnote on that last story. When my mother died, she was a school teacher, beloved school teacher, 4th grade. And at her calling hours, person after person came along in the line and said what a wonderful teacher she had been. I get teary just remembering this. And how a lot of these were kind of underdog kids that she encouraged in their development and in their learning, and gave them a sense of value. And I thought, gosh, I wish Mom was alive. They said these things next to her body in the funeral home, and I wish that my mother could hear what her life and her career as a teacher meant to these people. And these were adults, and that experience stayed with them for the rest of their lives. So I would say take advantage of opportunities like that, maybe a birthday or some other milestone or a holiday, but take advantage of the opportunity to show somebody what their life has meant for other people.
That's really helpful. Let's do one more question. Yeah, Bob.
Retirement. Should that be a goal or should it be a happening?
Are those the only two choices?
Well, I think that our society, from the time you're in your 20s, is save for retirement. Your whole goal is retirement. Is that a good goal?
I think a lot depends on how you view your own retirement and what you intend to do with it, with the time that it now frees up. If the goal of retirement, as is so often promoted by insurance companies and financial institutions, if the goal of retirement is to live a leisurely life, free of stress, with, as they say, your wealth protected, I think is the term, wealth protection. If that is the goal of retirement, I'd say that is incomplete at best. But if you view retirement as an opportunity to redirect your energy, then you can approach retirement eagerly and cheerfully. So now I have time to do these other things that along the way have taken on new importance for me.
The reason I asked that question is my dad retired when he was 65. He was a truck driver. but he was very involved with the people at work. He went every morning at 5, and then he retired at 65, and by 68 he was gone. He didn't do anything because he kind of took care of my mother, and he'd just take walks during the day. I often think that didn't help him. That did not help him in the latter stages of his life. Not to say that he wasn't going to go anyway, but I'm not sure he died a happy man.
Well, that's not uncommon. I'm sorry to hear that about
Yeah.
your dad, but it's not uncommon if they have not developed other commitments and other forms of directing their energy and their talent along the way. It can be a sudden break with what has been a fairly narrow channel for the person prior to retirement. So again, I would encourage people to pursue those other interests and have them ready and waiting for your added involvement at the moment that you retire and can devote more time to it.
I mean, my almost 15 years of ministry, I can't think of anybody who in retirement was active in the church who was unhappy with their life. And, people who found activities, ways to serve, to learn, to keep growing. If that was what they were called to do, they were happy. So I think that's your big takeaway is find those commitments, find those passions.
And be able to marshal your energy differently.
Exactly.
Don't try to do a takeover of the board of directors.
Is that from experience?
Well, I'm older than when my father passed, so I'm still working. I'm not wrapped up in my job. I just like the people I work with. And
Yeah.
gets me going every day.
And as Justin says, there's no better place to do that sort of preparation than here.
Yeah.
Because there are so many different roles that people can have. Again, I would advocate for intergenerational contact. And in that context, to be a mentor and not an advice giver. It's a fine line that separates those two approaches to younger people. Is to support them in their growth rather than imposing your sense of what they should be doing upon them and offering unsolicited advice.
Well, let's give Ed a round of applause. This was great. Thank you so much. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.